All right, good morning. We have a special guest today, bringing in an old friend of ours, Frank Giustra. Most of you must know who Frank is. I'm not going to make him go through and explain himself a little bit, but let's just say he's extremely active in the markets, especially in mining. And Doug and I are lucky enough to participate in some of his investments. And he also happens to know a lot about what's actually happening in the world. Unlike Doug and I, who basically seclude ourselves to tiny little Uruguay, Frank is all over the world, meeting with movers and shakers constantly. And so he'll have a lot to add to the conversation. So Frank, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Nice to be on and nice to see you, Doug.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
I've got to say, I'm still overawed by your generally excellent judgment, well, on everything, but especially also on markets. I mean, I remember when you decided to get out of the resource stocks pretty much at the top, selling Yorkton Securities, and open up and get into the movie business, which is one of the toughest businesses in the world. And the company you founded is Lionsgate, which makes about half of the popular movies out there today. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. That was a little side gig. Took 5 years out of my life, and then I came back into the resource business in 2001, just in time for that gold market to start. And that was a lot of
Strange.
fun.
Good timing again. And yeah,
Yeah.
Frank is a man of many talents, very creative. He has the world's best olive oil, although I am trying to compete with it. My little tiny little plot here, we are working hard but that is the gold standard that I hold myself to.
Okay, is that in Uruguay? You got olives?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Hey guys, listen, my wife and I have been discussing if the end of the world comes, and we need to get out of Dodge, we were thinking either Argentina or Uruguay. What would you recommend?
Well, Doug and I might have different views on this, but Uruguay might be the lowest volatility country on earth. So if you're looking at total chaos, Argentina is kind of prone to kind of likes, it seems, some chaos.
Yeah.
So there's some more risk there. There's more opportunity in Argentina, I think.
Yeah.
Low volatility, Uruguay is the answer.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, Doug, you remember we used to own a bunch of land in Argentina. You still do. I sold out after what, 15 years of hanging in there. Um, I'm looking for a farm in either Uruguay or Argentina, sort of a nice farm that can grow everything, has a couple of structures on it to house all of my family and all of my closest friends. So if you hear of anything, let me know.
I'll keep on the lookout. You got
yeah,
to check out my place, Frank. I think I got kind of the perfect property for the doomsday
Really?
scenario. I'm not kidding you.
Shoot
It's
it. I'm dead serious. Okay. I mean, we laugh about this, but you know what? The way things are unfolding, you just don't know. As you know, I'm the co-chair of the International Crisis Group, which is an NGO based in Brussels. We are analysts all over the world. Our mission was always to try and prevent or end deadly conflict, wars, etc. I've been on that board for 20 years. I've been co-chair now for the last 5 years. And that allows me to, gather a lot of information about what's really going on the ground in various areas of conflict or potential conflict. And so, with everything that I'm seeing and the way that the global geopolitical landscape is unfolding, anything can happen. Anything can happen. And, I've got some very strong views about what I think is now happening with the new Trump administration and their view on the rest of the world. So we can talk about that. But it's one of those moments in history that happens every sort of 100 years, 70 to 100 years, that where things change completely. You have an existing global hegemon, and then it switches over to another. And there's an intermittent period of chaos. And I think we're witnessing that transition, and it may take years, I don't know, but we're definitely in a transition period where the US was the hegemon, the sole hegemon for a long time, and now it's being challenged. It's being challenged in many different ways, but mainly by China. Of course, Russia is playing a role, but should be a much smaller concern than China to the US. But yeah, so we're seeing one of those moments in time that none of us have ever experienced. And this is what I always say about people's, uh, if people don't experience something themselves, they have no fear of it. It's just something that couldn't possibly happen. And, I always look back at my own parents that lived through the Depression and then World War II. They were living in Italy, so they saw the worst of it over there. And so they had a memory of hard times and what they really are like. I don't think our generation has a clue what could possibly happen. And so they don't fear it as much as they probably should.
Well, and they also don't have much grasp of history.
No, most people don't.
It's a disaster. And
Yeah, no, most people don't read history books. And that's, as Doug knows, I started writing. Actually, Doug, you published my first ever article in 2001. Do you remember that?
Oh.
And it was titled, A Tarnished Dollar Will Put a Shine on Gold. And you were kind enough to publish it in your Casey newsletter. And that was the first time I ever wrote anything. And I've been writing a lot more ever since on this stuff. But I said it back then that things were about to change, and you could see the patterns even back then were starting to shape up, and now we're here, and we've been talking about this for over 20 years, and it's finally here in front of us, and now it's even shocking, even though a number of us were predicting this kind of an outcome in the way that the whole global fabric is starting to tear. We never, when it actually happens, you go, holy cow, it's real, it's happening, and we're seeing it in real time.
And of course, the centerpiece in all this is the most famous man in the world, Donald Trump.
Yes.
How's he fit into this? What do you make of Trump?
Well, listen, Trump, because of the nature, the way he presents things, is, in my opinion, just merely exposes the long-running liberal hypocrisy on geopolitics and about America's role in the world. And he's basically saying the quiet part out loud. America's been behaving in a certain way for a very, very long time, while at the same time positioning themselves as a beacon of freedom and democracy, and which we all know has never been true. But what Trump is just doing now, and the way he's going about it, is just saying the quiet part out loud, And if you look at what he's trying to achieve, and I said this almost jokingly on another podcast a few months ago, but it's certainly looking like it's becoming real, and that is that Trump sees the world as, in my opinion, as three spheres of influence. His, which he would like to have as North America, Greenland, maybe the Panama Canal, who knows? That's his sphere of influence. He'll let Putin, do with Europe as Putin wishes, and China can have that region, including probably Taiwan. I'm not sure he would respond to any aggressive move against Taiwan. And it kind of reminds me of, the spheres of influence that were carved up prior to the end of World War II. Between Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, when they basically said, knowing that the war was coming to an end, they were basically carving up the world. Russia or Soviet Union those days, you're Eastern Europe and that part of the world, that's your sphere of influence. UK and North America will deal with Western Europe. And so I almost sense that, and I do believe Trump when he says he doesn't want war. He doesn't believe in war. He thinks war is and he's right. It's a waste of treasury, and it's a waste of time, and it's not good for business, except for the defense industry. So I think he is using a cudgel in many of his moves with the kind of threats that he made. But at the end of the day, he's looking to negotiate. So on the war front, I think he's on the right side of it in not wanting war. Although I question it with his threats against Iran right now, because that might be the one exception. But at the end of the day, he just wants to run his oligarchy. He wants to be the chief oligarch in his sphere of influence, and let Putin be his oligarch in his sphere of influence, and Xi the same thing in China. So that's the way I see it, shaping up. And it's looking like it's heading in that direction.
Is that bad? Is that a bad outcome?
Uh depends what side of the fence you're sitting on.
Exactly.
And I don't know. Is it bad? It's certainly the end of globalization. And globalization did it, have a lot of good and a lot of bad. And so it's just going to be a very different world. Whether it's better or not, depends on really what happened and how China reacts to this new world, and especially with respect to Taiwan. Um, Whether Trump and Putin can reach an agreement. And I said this a long time ago, all of this talk about from Trump during his campaign that you could end this thing in 24 hours was sheer folly. Putin is a very, very smart individual. He knows he's got the upper hand. They couldn't beat him down. And he's got the upper hand in the war in Ukraine. And he's not going to negotiate anything that isn't completely in his favor. And Trump is learning that very, very quickly. And now he's starting to be frustrated. So can the US and Russia come to an agreement with the Ukraine? Will Europe be on side with that agreement? Will Ukraine be on side with that agreement? A lot of ifs. So, although the ambition, the aspiration is to have this sort of different spheres of influence, can we get there without conflict? I'm not 100% sure. I think he would like it to happen without conflict. And he would even like a deal with Iran. He's actually put it out there. He said, "I want to negotiate," and Iran has rejected it, obviously, because they don't trust anything America says. But if we can get through this without a major global conflict, then maybe it is a good thing. I don't know. I really don't know, because there's so many variables, Matt. Anything can happen.
But we know a global conflict is the worst possible outcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I'd come and join you down in Uruguay. That were ever to happen. No, seriously. I mean, there are very few places on earth you can run to if you get a global conflict. Argentina, Uruguay, New Zealand. I think somebody mentioned Iceland, although I don't know if I could live in the dark 9 months of the year. But certainly those are the three most desirable escape routes.
And what do you think? We had Liberation Day recently, just the other day. I mean, I based upon the comments that Doug made earlier, I think of it more as Embargo Day, where the U.S. launched an embargo on itself. What's your response to those actions? I think you suggested already it's an attempt to get people to negotiate.
Yeah, I think that is one. If you saw yesterday after the market started to tank, and by today, an incredible day to stop drinking. You're looking, it's red all over. I've got my screen here. Everything's getting pounded. Everything. I think that, and you saw yesterday, there were a lot of the talking heads that speak for Trump, including his own son Eric, were putting out on social media, "Hey world, the first countries to come and negotiate will get the best deals. Don't be the last." And so I think it was either pre-planned to be a negotiation tactic, or that markets are scaring them. And maybe they're realizing that, and if you saw what China did this morning by increasing their tariffs by 34%, China's basically China's not going to buckle to a bully. They're basically giving the U.S. a middle finger on this one.
Even worse, they banned the export of certain rare earths.
Yeah. And that is, I've been saying, as you know, I'm in the mining business, and I've been saying for a long time that the race for critical minerals and rare earths it's a real competition. And China has 80 to 90% of the manufacturing, processing, refining power of all of these things. They control it. Now, the U.S. is trying to play catch up with all of their new policies with respect to these minerals. But, as we all know, that we've all been in the mining game, it takes a long time to get things up and running in the mining game. You have to find it, you have to develop it, you have to build it. For many things, it's a 10 to 15-year process. So I think the U.S. is really behind the 8 ball on this and has to play catch up. And this tariff war is not going to help, because China will respond. China's not going to be bullied as much as Trump believes. Whether the EU starts to give concessions or not, it's still up in the air. I think that they're trying to put forth pay a little bit of tribute in saying, well, we'll buy a little bit more LNG, or we'll buy more of our weapons from U.S. manufacturers. But that's not going to achieve what Trump's goal was, which is to basically bring a manufacturing base back to the U.S. I don't think it's going to create a big dent in it. So the world is going to react differently depending on their position of strength or weakness. Canada, we're in a hot mess and a dumpster fire sitting above a meth lab with respect to our position with the U.S. We're screwed because we're so weak. It's a weak economy with a weak leadership. 78% of our exports go to the U.S. We can't win a war of attrition in a tariff fight with the U.S. So now Trump's backed off a bit with Canada. We'll see if that's a function of him waiting to see if Carney gets elected. He'd rather have Carney elected than Poilievre. And by the way, that race is very close. So we're going to know April 28th. But with respect to the rest of the world, the weak players will try and negotiate and cave in somewhat. The strong players are going to just give them the middle finger, as China has already done. Europe is the question mark. So we'll see how Europe responds over the next couple of weeks on this.
Europe does seem like a sinking ship in just about every way I can think of, though.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, Europe is always a problematic union because it's always had this sort of monetary union, but without a fiscal, with different fiscal policies. And now over the last number of years, even culturally, they're going different directions, and in terms of things like migration, et cetera. And their allegiance, whether they want to be friendly with Russia or not. So yeah, Europe is not really unified in that sense. So again, anything can happen there. Putin, I'm sure, is hoping for the breakup of the EU. Obviously, he wants the breakup of NATO, but he might get it. I don't know. I mean, there are very few strong leaders in Europe. You think about it.
Does NATO serve any useful purpose anymore, Frank? It seems to me that it should have been disbanded when the Soviet Union was disbanded.
Yeah, again, the purpose, you're talking about NATO or the EU?
Well, I think they're both dead ducks, but NATO.
Well, NATO should have been disbanded, and obviously, I've got my own opinions about why this Ukraine war started in the first place, and everybody puts the blame on Russia. And by the way, Putin's no saint. I'm not trying to, defend Putin's actions here, but NATO broke the U.S. and NATO broke their promise. They made a promise back in the Clinton administration that they would move not one further inch west. And what have they done since? How many countries have joined since? And they pushed, they kept pushing the envelope too far. And Putin always said Ukraine was the final straw. Ukraine cannot join NATO, period. He made it very clear. And, there was almost an agreement ready to sign between Zelensky and Putin. And the U.S. through the UK went and killed that deal. And then the invasion started. So they could have prevented this war, but it was all about the U.S., mostly the U.S., I would say, and parts of NATO that wanted to weaken the Russians, have always wanted to weaken the Russians. And they saw this as an opportunity to they told Zelensky, don't sign the deal, fight instead. And I guess Zelensky felt he was forced into it. And so Putin did what he did, and here we are. So there's a lot of blame on all sides, but I really do believe that NATO broke their word and caused this to happen over a number of years.
Total agreement. There's one other factor you didn't mention, and that is since the color revolution that the U.S. fomented in 2014, and the Donbass broke off because they're Russian speaking and they were under attack, and this was another influence, I think, that it seems to me that the chances of Russia trying to conquer Europe, which a lot of these people seem to talk, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the talking point they all use. And if you think about it from Putin's perspective, why the hell would he even attempt that? First of all, he couldn't pull it off. You've got nuclear weapons in 2 countries in Europe. He wouldn't dare start a war against Europe, and he doesn't have the capacity to take invade other countries.
And
I
what's the
think
game?
that is a false narrative, and it's certainly useful when you're trying to rally the troops. But I agree. I don't think it's something that Putin has in mind or would even dare to attempt.
I'm curious what you think about the tone between the US and the EU. It's become so belligerent now. And I talk to the Europeans that I talk to, even the ones there, and I talk to ones who are, more like think like me and, aren't so Trump derangement syndrome oriented. But they tell me that Europeans, I mean, even ones that wouldn't necessarily be biased to hate Trump have really turned against him.
Mhm.
And which you think it's making it hard for us to ever like come to positive terms with Europe in
Yeah.
this situation, right? What are you hearing about that?
Well, no, I agree. I think, yeah, and by the way, it's also Trump's fault to a certain extent because of his approach to doing it and the
Yeah, exactly.
rhetoric that he uses. I mean, you don't go to Europe like J.D. Vance did and insult the entire European Union in the way that he did. There are ways to do things. You can be very firm and very strong about what your policies you're trying to achieve, but to insult people continuously in the way that Trump and now Vance are doing, you have to ask yourself, is that the right approach? And I always think that people are going to get their back up. They're going to get their back up, and they did. And so they have a tremendous dislike for Trump and his people. And that's, if you know anything about diplomacy, there are certain ways, certain times you have to be very tough, but insulting is, what are you hoping to achieve by insulting people continuously?
Publicly.
And that's that. So, but I don't think I don't think the Europeans are doing themselves any favors either. Um, I'm of the belief that this war has to end. And yes, Ukraine's going to lose land. Yes, Ukraine's going to have to live within certain parameters with respect to the type of defense it's going to be allowed to have. Um, Europe's involvement in Ukraine defense systems. There are a lot of very difficult parts that need to be negotiated, but I believe that war has come to an end because it's a hopeless war with a lot of people dying unnecessarily, and who's benefiting? The only benefactors are the military-industrial complex by selling all of these weapons. And and I've always had an issue with the military-industrial complex because they and their think tanks that are staffed with their people are the ones that create these wars that are unnecessary, completely unnecessary.
What do
And
you hear?
so, yeah,
What do you hear about Zelensky's personal fortune? Because it was revealed with the Panama Papers some years ago that he had, uh, through that law firm in Panama, what the heck is the name of that law firm, that he already had around 300 or $400 million sequestered. And now things that are coming out make him seem like a multi-billionaire. So he's stolen a lot of money that's gone through the Ukraine. What do you think? What's going to happen with that?
I don't know. I read the same things that you read, Doug. Do I know if they're all true? I don't know. Would it surprise me? No. But there's a lot of misinformation being peddled back and forth between Russia and the West, and they're both very good at it. And so, I have an entire problem with the media in general. I think, these days it's almost impossible to determine what is true. You have to wade through a swamp of deceit to find a grain of truth in
Yeah.
today's world. And I do this because of all the things. I write a lot of articles. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I'm the co-chair of the International Crisis Group. So I consider myself someone that really is well informed, like has a real finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world. And I find it difficult to sometimes determine when I see something, read something, whether it's true or not. And then I have to do a whole bunch of back checking to see where the information came from, whether it was, verified by someone else. And it's just, whether it's mainstream media, social media, it's difficult to understand what's true. So to answer your question, Doug, would it surprise me? No. Do I know that it's a fact? I don't know. I read a lot of things about a lot of people, and and some of it is planted, some of it's true. It's impossible for me to do. But again, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
With crisis group, you've got because you have people on the ground and they're feeding information back to you, right? So you almost have like a little private intel network in a way to get.
It is, and that's why the entire all the diplomatic offices and foreign offices around the world use our information, and that's why our staff is continuously meeting with policymakers all over the world, and they love our information. Whether they want to use it for something useful or not, we don't always know, but they love our information because it's generated from the ground. We have people on the ground, and we try and talk to all sides. So we've had conversations with the Iranians in the past, and obviously we've had conversations with Hamas and Hezbollah, and in Colombia we had to have conversations with the FARC, and to try and come up with solutions that both parties, negotiation. And we were part of the FARC agreement with the Colombian government, and where President Santos won the Nobel Peace Prize because we helped him negotiate that, because we were chatting with the other side. So yeah, we have great intel. It's not always, our policies that are generated from that intelligence are not always listened to, but we try.
Surprise,
we try
surprise.
hard. We try hard.
Well, what do
What's
you
going
make?
to happen? Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, go.
What's going to happen with Israel, Frank? This dust up that they're involved in now is lasting for years.
Yeah.
In the past, they had 3-day wars, 7-day wars, this type of thing. And there's a lot of antagonism. Can Israel survive another decade?
Yeah, I think they can survive another decade. Again, Israel, whatever your beliefs are about the way that Israel conducts, its policies and its wars, I have my own opinions about it, and I think what they did in Gaza was both a combination of some form of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and they're doing the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank as well. And I I was recently in another country. I'll only say this: I was recently in another country where I was introduced to an Israeli former politician, former IDF general, part of the negotiating team for the Abraham Accords, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he gave me a very clear view of what they're trying to achieve. He wasn't pulling any punches. Basically, they want to cleanse Gaza, and I would presume the West Bank as well, of Palestinians. And what they want to do is ship them off to other countries. And they're having conversations with Egypt and Jordan,
Ireland even, right?
Ireland, Indonesia, Pakistan, and as he put it, a couple of African countries. I think Somalia was one of them. And what they want to do is ship everybody out and make that a part of Greater Israel. He was very clear about it. He was, and I listened very politely. I'm going, it's okay. A, who's going to pay for it? B, why would the Palestinians leave? Well, basically, he said, because it's destroyed. There's nothing there. He didn't say they were the ones that destroyed it, but basically it's destroyed, so they have nowhere to live. So we should put and Trump has been very much on side with this, as you know, this idea of creating a resort in Gaza. I don't know. Did you see that video with him and Musk and all these? I mean, honestly, for a U.S. president, I mean, it just that part is like, I don't understand why the Arab countries are going to allow this to happen. The Jordans, the Egypts, in Saudi Arabia, who's going to have a big say in this, because there's been a push to get Saudi Arabia signed up to the Abraham Accords, and they've been reluctant because of the Palestinian issue. They just won't do it, and especially now after all this, because you guys, you got to deal with the Palestinian issue in a way that's fair to the Palestinians. And that was always going to be a two-state solution, which I think is kind of dead in the water at the moment. But I think what Israel has done and how they dealt Hezbollah a blow and what they've done with Syria, I think they've got the upper hand at the moment. and now they're pushing for some conflict with Iran. They're trying to push the U.S. into a conflict with Iran, and I think that be a huge mistake for the U.S. Huge, and everybody knows it. But Israel is very determined to use the U.S. in any way they can to get what they want out of that part of the world. And Netanyahu has proved that he'll do anything. Just
Yeah.
he doesn't care about how many lives are lost and the suffering, and it's for all of us watching this, it's tragic, and but unless the U.S. changes its policy on Israel, they'll continue to do what they do, and just have to know that that's the case. The U.S., with the way AIPAC has controlled all of the politicians, almost without exception, maybe the
Massey.
squad and Massey are the only two that probably don't take AIPAC money. But the rest of Congress does, and they toe the line with this is we're Israel's best friend. They can do anything they want. We don't care. They're our ally. Period. And now Trump obviously got a lot of money from that community. What's her name? The one from Vegas.
Adelson.
Yeah,
Adelson.
yeah. How much did she give?
100 million.
100 million. So they're beholden to Israeli policy, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So there you have it.
Do you think that Trump, going after Iran certainly would serve the Israeli interests in their opinion? I'm not even sure it really would, but in their opinion,
it wouldn't, but that's what they believe.
Yeah, and but I wonder if there's an argument to be made that it might also serve the U.S.'s interest. I'm not saying it's my opinion, in that recognizing that China is the chief adversary of the U.S. and that Iran is a partner in some ways with China. Yeah, well, they at least supply them with oil, if nothing else, and then maybe the damage that would be caused in that entire region. Maybe that would have a more negative effect on China than it would on the U.S.
I don't think so. I think China takes about 1 million barrels of oil a day from Iran.
That's what it is.
And they're buying it at a nice discount because they're paying in yuans. I don't think Russia and China are going to like any move against Iran, and they've already made that clear. I think it'd be a huge mistake, and it would backfire on the U.S. I don't agree that what you're putting forward makes any sense. And I don't know who's saying it, but I've never heard it.
I just think I'm trying to get my mind, in the mind of Hegseth, and these people are very seem to be out for blood also for Iran, that maybe they could twist this idea in their head that destruction might not blow back on them as much.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think for the U.S. administration at this moment in time, it's the threats are, they're making all these threats, moving the bombers down to that island in what's it called,
Diego Garcia
Island, all these stealth bombers, because they're out of Iranian missile range. And so they're making all these threats, but I really truly believe that Trump wants a peace deal with Iran. He's said it. He wants to, have a deal. Now, Israel has a completely different agenda here, completely different agenda. And they would like to see the regime collapse, the existing regime. That's how they want to see it. Actually, that guy that I met that I was telling you about was predicting that the regime would, collapse in the next sort of 3 months, which I kind of find, I don't know, I believe that. But anyway, I think that Trump would like to have a deal where he puts an end to that war so he can focus on the competition with China. America's too far stretched, dealing with all of these things. And as with every empire, it had too many, fires to put out, too many conflicts, and, it's bankrupting the nation. It's already bankrupted the nation, as far as I'm concerned. But so I truly believe that Trump does not want wars, period. But he's willing to threaten them with all sorts of things to get his way.
Okay, certainly hope that's it.
Yeah, me too.
So what do you think about the market reaction to Liberation Day?
It didn't surprise me. We all know, maybe you agree or disagree, but, these tariffs and then the retaliation from a lot of the players that's going to come is not good for the MAGA base. You think about it. What are these tariffs going to do? Cause inflation, cause prices to go up in a lot of the goods that are coming into the U.S. So the consumer has to pay that. It's certainly going to slow down growth and most likely put us in a recession. Put America in a recession, probably the entire world in a recession. And that means layoffs. Workers are going to get laid off. And so you have to ask yourself, come the midterm elections next year, is Trump sacrificing the Republican control of Congress with all of these tariffs? People are going to be pissed. Here they're giving, they're trying to push through this bill to give the tax cuts, make them permanent, and that's really for the upper middle class, the rich. Doesn't do the average worker any good. They're giving away these golden passports for $5 million a pop, and who's that catering to? Again, the rich. And generally, it's already been seen that he's surrounding himself with an oligarchy of billionaires that are interested in business and making money and enriching themselves. And I fear he's going to lose the MAGA base if this continues. If this tariff war continues and what I just suggested happens, the rising costs, layoffs, recession, you have to ask yourself, how are they going to vote next year? And I'm sure that a lot of Republicans in Congress are thinking the same thing. So again, I almost believe that he's going to start negotiating, that this was a salvo, an opening salvo, and that he doesn't want this to continue because the market starts to crater, and he might get his lower dollar, which is something he wants. So that's one achievement. Lower rates and lower dollar, he might get that, but he's only going to get it through a recession. And it might be a really bad one because of all the debt. You think of the credit card debt, the mortgage delinquencies are all at record levels right now. And it's really the working class that is going to be hit the worst and is being hit the worst. And they can't afford to, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have no savings to fall back on in case of an emergency, which is the case in America today. And then you get a recession, you're up to your eyeballs in debt. And the cost of living goes up. Geez, what are you going to think? So I would think Trump has thought this through. Maybe he hasn't, but I would think that he would want to stand. Wouldn't want a global trade war.
Yeah, I think the federal debt to GDP is like 120 right now.
Yeah,
but the private debt to GDP in America is 140 right now.
Yeah. No,
so it's not just that the government is totally in debt and underwater. The American families are too.
Yeah, and I think, as I've been saying for a long time, and Doug knows this, I've been talking about a global monetary system reset for 6 years now. I was laughed at first that it would never happen. The U.S. dollar is always going to reign supreme, but it's happening, and you're seeing a de-dollarization movement, which has been happening at a very, very steady pace. You've seen the accumulation of gold by central banks at an accelerating pace, and I think the only way out of this is by a global monetary system reset. And what that means is anybody's guess. I could give you a couple of ideas of how it might work, and I think gold will play a role. It certainly looks like gold's going to play a role. You've seen how much physical gold has come into the U.S. since December now.
I was going to ask you what you made of that.
Judging by the size, what was it, 40 million ounces?
Well, 2,000 metric tons, which I believe is more like 74 million.
70, yeah, it was 70 million ounces. It has to be government related. It can't be institutions or individuals. This is too big a number. So I think that the U.S., well, the rest of the world, you see what China and Saudi Arabia have been doing, and they're buying their gold covertly. They're not making any noise about it. They're not disclosing. Saudi Arabia doesn't disclose anything, but we've seen the physical gold flows from Swiss refineries into Saudi Arabia in the last year or so. It's like very large quantities of gold are going there. They're not disclosing it, and China is only disclosing a small amount what they really own. I mean, the world's largest producer, the world's largest importer, have been forever, and they don't allow the export of mined gold in China to be exported. Where's all that? It's not all going to individuals. A lot of it is going, in my guess, to state-controlled institutions. And at some point in time, when it's convenient for China to declare what they have, because there's a purpose to it, I think we'll find out that they have a lot more than 2,200 tons. And I think that the world is, the rest of the central banks are all stocking up, and the physical gold is starting to be shifting. People are becoming afraid of where their gold is stored. So in Germany the other day saying, there was all this talk, let's bring it back here. We can't trust the US anymore. So I think that gold is going to play a role. What that looks like, again, anybody's guess. I can give you 3 or 4 different ideas how that might play out. I think the biggest threat is this M-Bridge project that was launched by China, Thailand, the UAE, Hong Kong, and recently Saudi Arabia joined, and that's basically using central bank digital currencies, ledger to ledger, settlement of forex, exchange mechanisms, using local currencies. Okay, completely outside the US dollar system. And my guess is, because you can already, as a sovereign, I think you can already exchange your yuans on the Shanghai Futures Exchange for gold. So I think that maybe gold will be used as the asset that settles not deficits, but unwanted currency. Like, let's say there's bilateral trade between 2 nations. They're trading in their local currencies. And at the end of some period of time, there's some unwanted currency with the ones with the trade deficit or the surplus. What can they do? Maybe they'll be able to exchange it for gold to settle the accounts. That's one route. The other route that's being discussed is, again, like going back to the old days, pre-World War II, where you had currencies backed. There's a certain percentage of gold backing to currencies, anywhere between 20 and 40% backing of currencies. The UK, the US, they all did it. And so the only thing I would say for anybody that owns gold is that if that were to happen, if gold did play a role in that way, then you'd have to increase the value of the gold price to allow that to happen. If you want to align it with either M0 or M1, you have to change the price of gold, much like Roosevelt did in 1933.
Or the magnitude more.
But a magnitude more. And I think someone did the calculation. I've seen so many calculations, but if we were to go back to 1934 and the backing of gold M1, if we had to back it with M1 backing today at a 38% backing, it would mean $11,000 gold. If you wanted to do it on M2 at a 24% backing, it would mean $20,000 gold. And those numbers may be low, because I've seen other numbers. A lot of guys like Jim Rickard have put together models that have suggested it could be a lot higher, like a lot higher. So it's anybody's guess, but my guess is with all of this accumulation of physical gold by every central bank outside of the G7, because the G7 already has their gold except for Canada and the UK, that gold is going to play a role. And I just don't know what that is.
Yeah, I wonder about that whole percentage backing thing, because, I was doing some research, because the number I always heard, and maybe I heard it through Rickards, was like 40% was kind of the magic number.
Yeah.
And I went back and I looked, and it turns out like it was, before the mid 1800s, it was always 100% backed. And then the Bank of England rolled out, it's 40%. And other central banks followed, but the U.S. bucked the trend in the 1880s and said, no, it's 100% backed. And it wasn't until the Fed came along, and the Fed set the standard of following the Bank of England of 40%. And then, of course, it got dwindled little by little since then. But if you did it based upon even M0 at 100% backing, you're looking at $21,000 gold.
Anyways, pick a number, because none of us know what the outcome. So we're speculating here, and who knows? I know this: gold's going a lot higher because of what has to happen. How high? I don't know. I've never predicted the price of gold. You look like an idiot when you do that.
Yeah.
So I've never done that. I refuse to predict gold prices. But I've always said, and I bought my gold in, if Doug remembers, back in 2001. I've never sold an ounce. And then I bought again in 2018. And then I don't sell. I just, because it's my nest egg. It's where I'm protected, and I know that whatever happens, gold's not going to zero.
You know,
Yeah,
I
we're
just
in the same mind, Frank. No, in fact, on everything you've said. But why do you think? Have you heard anything about why Argentina shipped its gold to Europe? 2 billion ounces, 2 billion dollars worth of gold. It makes no sense. Countries should be repatriating their gold.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know
Wouldn't
what
that
they're
get
thinking.
hurt?
With Milei, it's hard to tell. At first he also wanted to dollarize the economy, which was always going to be an impossible task. And I said it before he won the election. He was campaigning on dollarizing the Argentinian economy, and it's just he doesn't have the reserves or the muscle to do that. And he said a lot of things. He was very anti-China during his campaign, and
Hmm.
then after he got elected, he said, well, China is an interesting prospect. So much like Meloni in Italy was campaigning against China in relationships when she was campaigning, and then she got elected, and all of a sudden she's a lot friendlier to China. So you can't quit China. It's too big a piece of the global puzzle. As, as remember the Eagles song, you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. That if you want to check out with China, you can't leave. It's too big a piece of the puzzle. You can't decouple. It's impossible.
that does appear what advisors from Trump, what he had his the guy who managed trade during the first administration, Lighthizer is his
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
And what he advocates for is a strategic decoupling from China.
Yeah,
And
strategic, and that's I've had these conversations with people. Strategic meaning that you don't get your sensitive technology, anything related to defense or national security, that you don't want to have that relationship with China, that trading. So you have to work, but with the basic goods, you want to still have a trading relationship, not on sensitive items, and that might be achievable. Yeah. So. Um, but again, it depends how this tariff war is going to play out. I mean, how's the U.S. now going to react to China's retaliation of 34%? Trump has always threatened you retaliate, well, you bring a knife, we'll bring out a bazooka, and so we'll see how much stomach he has to really engage in a global trade war with China, and when he's actually at the same time challenging the entire world. So who are his allies if he wants to get into a pissy match with China? It's like he's dissed everybody. So again, I think this is all meant to be a negotiation. And he's prone to lobbying rhetorical hand grenades to cause a reaction, and then hopes to rattle everybody, put everybody on their back foot, and then allows him to negotiate something that the other side seems more reasonable than his initial position. And so I think that's his approach. But at the same time, I also say that I think the rest of the world is catching on to his negotiating style. So it might not work perfectly as much as he's planned.
right, or he's got to up the ante from
Or
there
up
in
to
some way. And,
Yeah, but
and
up the
and
ante how?
well, here's what Trump's statement was in response to China's response. He says, quote, China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they cannot afford to do.
Yeah, what does that mean? I don't know what the hell
I
that
don't know.
means. It's I'm sure China is not panicking. China has always they're way more strategic than America has ever been, okay, in terms of their long-term planning. They're on a course, okay, and if you look at, whether the Belt and Road Initiative and all the things that are doing and winning the hearts and minds of a lot of the global South, including in Africa, Latin America, um, they're playing it very methodically, very carefully. And what their approach was to dismantle the world order in a very methodical, careful, slow fashion. Trump's come in and taken a sledgehammer to the world order, and a completely different approach. And so I don't know how this is going to play out, but I don't think China. You can bully China. You know, or the BRICS, because you think about it this way: a bully always picks on the weakest. right? That's how bullies behave. That's why Canada was his first target, because we were so weak. But it related to a bully picking on a kid in the back of a schoolyard. Easy to do, but then if 50 of his friends are lined up behind him, he's going to think twice. Okay, and that's the beauty of the BRICS, and that's the power of numbers, because a lot of these countries never had the courage to challenge America economically. But that's why China putting the BRICS together is a real threat to America's position in the world, and Trump knows it, and all this talk about the creation of a BRICS currency and how Trump reacted to that, threatening that any country that even thinks about creating a BRICS currency will be, slapped with 100% tariffs.
100% tariffs, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But what did that do? I think that was a very weak response. It actually probably accelerates the process of de-dollarization. It makes you look weak. It makes you look like you're panicking. And you can't, when you have to tell people, I am forcing you to use my currency, that's not exactly reassuring, to people where to park their savings or, their reserves. So I know what Trump's trying to do. I just don't think that it's going to work out the way he's planned, and it's going to have a lot of blowback. And the U.S., as you know, is in a very terrible fiscal position. These deficits, they're not going away. I don't care what they talk about cutting, the cost of government. They're cutting at the margins. 86% of the budget is non-discretionary spending, Social Security, Medicaid, all those things. Interest costs, which, you're stuck with, unless you really bring the rates back down to zero. And defense spending, which in fact is going up instead of going down. So you're cutting, when Musk comes in there and he's doing all these cuts, he's cutting little bits at the margin. The deficit, I guarantee you that the deficit will probably go up.
This year, for sure. Well,
this year, for sure. And especially if these tax cuts become permanent. And if we go into a recession, they're going to have to provide stimulus. I predict QE again. I think there's so much debt in the system that we're going to, they're ending QT, and I always predict that QE will come back. And when it comes back, it'll come back with real, they're going to destroy that currency. Yeah, I've always said they were in an inescapable trap that they put themselves in after the 2008 crisis. Once they started printing money, it was over. And you cannot ever, I always said you'd never reduce that balance sheet like Bernanke promised you would reduce the balance sheet of the Fed. They took it down, what, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion? That's it. It's going to go back up. Okay. And so because, the world, with all of this animosity now, who's going to buy the T-bills? Who's going to buy all these treasuries? They have to refinance with $7.5 trillion this year. Who's buying them if he's creating a war with the rest of the world and everybody's afraid of being sanctioned with U.S. dollar sanctions? It has to be the Fed. It's always been the buyer of last resort is the Fed. And how does that work? They print money to buy treasuries. It's a big Ponzi.
So Trump will get his wish, and there will be a lower dollar, and there's going to be higher gold. But when do you think that all these little gold companies, of which there are many hundreds, are going to finally move?
That's a really good question, Doug. And as you know, I've been doing this for 46 years when I got into this market the first time. So I watched a number of these cycles where the commodities and gold go up in price, metals and golds go up in price, and you get this amazing run in the juniors, and it's not happening this time. And no. I can give you, and it puzzles me as well, and I can give you 3 or 4 reasons if you like. First and foremost, I think that the way that the American speculator is looking at markets is they've been focused on tech, crypto, Bitcoin, and that's where the speculation money has been going, to new tech ideas, crypto and Bitcoin. That's number one. So it's the investing psychology for many years has been momentum. There are very few value investors left in the marketplace. You got Buffett, and everybody's a momentum.
All cash. He's all cash.
Yeah, he's all cash. Smart. Talk about smart, cashing out when he did, right at the high, and probably sitting back just waiting to pick his spots. So that's number one, is that the mentality, the speculation money has gone that direction. Number two, the whole ESG movement, which I think is coming to an end, basically labeled mining as a dirty business. So a lot of the institutions that would normally have bought mining stocks stopped, and they still haven't come back. So now I'm telling you, ESG is going to be trumped, pardon the pun, ESG is going to be trumped by this new reality that there's going to be a race for critical minerals, and it's actually becoming a global war for critical minerals, not just a race. So I think that will change, but that certainly has had an effect in terms of the number of institutional buyers. We used to have a lot of mining dedicated funds that simply have gone out of business. And so the amount of capital is dedicated to mining that would have usually bought those junior mining companies are gone. They're gone. And the third reason, I think that the industry hasn't performed. I think, there are way too many juniors out there, burning overhead, not achieving anything, taking up space. We should eliminate a lot of the juniors out there that are garbage, that are just promotions. There should be a consolidation. And then within that consolidation, you have to deliver performance. And the industry hasn't done that well. We think about, especially on the junior end, in delivering results that are economic. So yeah, I think it's a combination of things. What will it take for it to change? I don't know. I was saying when gold was 1800, I was saying, the minute the gold breaks through 1900, watch out, they're going to come in. It didn't happen. Here we are with $33,000 gold today, and it still hasn't happened. I have stock positions that are trading the same price they were trading at 2020, mining deals. They haven't changed. They go up a bit, go down a bit. Usually they trickle up when gold price goes up marginally, and then they get slammed when the gold market goes down. So I don't, Doug, I don't have an answer because I've been wrong. And and I don't know what it's going to take for it to change. But I just gave you 3 reasons why we're there.
If the institutions I didn't understand that there aren't these institutions dedicated to mining anymore. Wasn't aware of that. But my theory has basically been that retail has been totally uninterested in gold so far, despite gold's, breaking 3,000. And, the reason it's broke 3,000 is because central banks are buying.
Yeah,
not retail. I mean, I've heard from retail sellers who are like, I've been buying more from their customers than they've been selling to customers in the last several months.
You're absolutely right. And it to me, it's like this is a gold rally. It's like having a gold rush without the saloon girls and the champagne. Okay, it's nobody knows it's happening. Nobody cares, and it's happening. Gold has gone up dramatically, and nobody gives a damn. And certainly with gold or with gold mining stocks. So yeah, it's a stealth rally, and I don't know what it's going to take. And certainly the U.S. media has never done gold any favors. They've been pumping the hell out of Bitcoin. They're screaming at the top of their lungs, buy Bitcoin, is going to 1 million, 10 million, 40 million, all these stupid numbers of Bitcoin that I think make it, it's not a good thing for Bitcoin. I think the Michael Saylors of the world are doing a great disservice, but they're not doing the same with gold. Whenever they publish an article on gold, you always see there's a cautionary statement put in there, but it's a risky investment. It doesn't produce dividends. And, does Bitcoin produce dividends? It's where the U.S. media, because I've said this before, there has been an effort over the last 50 years to tarnish gold's reputation by the system in the U.S. And the system is everybody. It's policymakers, it's the Fed, it's businesses, it's anybody that wants to maintain U.S. dollar supreme status is going to have to be naturally against gold. So they've been trying to tarnish it for the last 50 years. And they're quickly finding out that, gold's one of the few metals that doesn't tarnish. But at the same time, they're not promoting it in the way they're promoting Bitcoin. But I look at it this way. I look at the reality. Why, and I keep coming back, why did Saudi Arabia and China buy their gold so secretly? They're not screaming at the top of their lungs they're buying gold. Meanwhile, here in the US, everybody's buy Bitcoin. Don't buy gold, don't buy gold. There's a reason. And you have to think through what it is that's preventing the media in this country to say anything good about gold, because promoting gold is suggesting that the dollar is losing its status, losing its value. And that is going to put America's supremacy in the global financial system at risk. Because as soon as the US dollar is not the reserve currency anymore, that game is over. All of those trillions of dollars they've made over the decades by controlling the global financial system will go away. So of course they're going to be against gold. And they, and they'll never promote it. And so you're not, the American retail public is distracted with crypto and Bitcoin and meme coins and all this crap, and that's how they think about getting rich. And I think it's all going to end in tears.
Thanks. So you're saying I shouldn't sell one of my kidneys and
No,
buy
no.
Bitcoin?
I said when Saylor put that out, that I said you should throw in a lung, because kidney ain't gonna do it. But sailors, I don't know what you guys think about Bitcoin. I've never had an issue with Bitcoin. My issue was always with Michael Saylor's ridiculous statements about where it's going. And he keeps, so what he's appealing to is the greed factor. And so remember, back when I had my debate with him in 2020, Bitcoin was going to go to 500,000. That same year, he changed his target to 1 million. Last year, it went up to 13 million. He just put out something the other day that it suggests Bitcoin is going to go to 45 million. He has to keep this game going. It's a pyramid, and a pyramid needs new buyers. And if you can't generate new buyers, you think of all the Bitcoin that he's bought through his strategy company. He's bought billions and billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and it's gone down. Okay, most of the retail public that came into Bitcoin when the ETFs were introduced are underwater. Okay, so they're not jumping in. So now he's trying to create narratives about a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is not going to happen. They created one, but it's for confiscated Bitcoin. It's not going to use taxpayer money to buy Bitcoin. And he keeps promoting that that's going to happen, is going to happen, or that every corporate in the world is going to buy Bitcoin with their treasury. So he keeps using different narratives. He cut and jukes more than Michael Jordan. This guy, he really always finds a new narrative. He used to be when he started promoting, it was anti-dollar. He said, no. Now it's complementary to the dollar.
Exactly.
Yeah, now he's trying to convince the government to play a role. So he can't say it's anti-dollar anymore. So this guy is completely full of shit. He's appealing to the FOMO and greed factor, and he's 24/7 campaigning. He's on every podcast, every news channel, every day saying something outrageous about Bitcoin. So again, my issue was never with Bitcoin. I do have an issue with him saying that gold's going to zero, and it's the garbage investment of all time because it's going to zero, and Bitcoin's going to, whatever number you want to pick. That I have an issue with. Or the $500 trillion of global assets, bond assets, are going to all flow into Bitcoin. I mean, who is stupid enough to understand this stuff? But he's got a following, and it's a cult.
Yeah, to me, the biggest thing is he said,
I get
mortgage
attacked.
your house.
I get attacked continuously on Twitter by his cult, and they call me all the names, and they use all the same cult language. Yeah, I'm too. I should go die, boomer. Have fun staying poor. You're gonna get wrecked. It's just all the same language because it's a cult. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not judging Bitcoin. I'm judging how it's being promoted. And that part of it's going to hurt a lot of people, I think.
I agree with you 100%. And his comment about he's just going to burn all of his Bitcoin when he dies. And I was like, if you're serious about it, do it now. Like, why?
Do it now. And what is your shareholder going to say about that?
Yeah.
The people that bought into strategy, I mean, none of it. It's all, honestly, it just makes me crazy that he gets airtime. And he gets airtime on CNBC, and honestly, it tells me we're at the end of a mega bubble that is going to blow up in one way or another at some point. I'm not predicting it's going to happen tomorrow, but we're in the most incredible global bubble in the entire history of the world. This is as big as it gets, this bubble. And I think when it pops by some event, whether it's a war or whether it's, a global depression, a collapse of a major financial institution, who knows? It could come another pandemic. Who knows? You just don't know. But it'll take another event when people really panic and any risk on asset is like poison. that's when you'll see a collapse in the non-real things,
And we've
in
seen
all the
Bitcoin
papers.
trade, and we've seen Bitcoin trade like the Nasdaq so far. That's
Yeah, it's almost perfectly correlated. So, the case that he's making that Bitcoin is digital gold is bullshit. It's just, it's not. It may aspire to be, but aspiration does not make fact. And so you can't keep saying something that's not true.
Yeah,
You
and
can
I don't
say,
see
yeah,
all
well,
the
eventually
censorship.
it will be, and okay, well then you're speculating. You're speculating.
Yeah.
So call it a speculation. Call it what it is. You're speculating that someday Bitcoin will be digital gold. I think technology is moving far too quickly for that to ever happen. I think Bitcoin, something is going to happen that's going to endanger Bitcoin or replace it.
Hmm. Does it give you any relief with the junior miners? That I'm just looking at the GDXJ, which is index of junior miners.
Yeah.
It is up 21% year to date. So
Yeah.
it is showing a little sign of life.
A little sign, but it's lagging, and you should probably not look at it today.
No, today it's way down. I'm
Yeah.
saying when I looked at it before, it was up like 35% for the year.
Yeah.
And now it's only up 21.
Yeah. But there are very few buyers still. Very, very few buyers. I mean, if you think about it, what was the statistic? Back in 1980, and Doug, you'll know this, gold represented 0.5% of investment portfolios around the world globally. No, sorry, it represented 2.4%. Today it's 0.5%. Okay, if we were to go back to 2.4% of investment portfolios, you'd have to buy another 230,000 tons.
That's right. And in addition to that, roughly the same is true of oil, which used to be a very substantial part of the S&P. Now it's just a rounding error almost.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to get a shift. It's all been about tech for a long time now. Tech and the Magnificent Seven, the Teslas, the Amazons. It's been all about that. And as a result, those stocks got extremely overvalued by any historical standard. Extremely. Now they're coming back to earth, but there's going to be a shift. I believe we're going to go back to what the world really needs, which is commodities, especially now that the world's not getting along. And so everybody's going to try and get their hands around food, energy, and metals. Okay, potash, whatever. That's going to become very important. So I think we're going to see a shift away from the sort of the tech, social media players, all those, towards real assets. And, that's why I'm long things like Rio and BHP and, Petrobrazil and all these. They have great dividend yields. And I still think that the cycle is just in the beginning stages.
Yeah, and that gets to a point I wanted to ask you, because you've been an extremely active investor at different times in your life, and you've sat on the sidelines or pursued diversions like starting a film studio at different times. It seems to me that you're very active again. And, what's the reason for that?
Because I see an opportunity here. I'm going to be 68 this summer. I'm not a spring chicken, and I believe that this is probably the last bull market that I'm going to participate in. Before I'm put out to pasture. And I believe this is going to be a really, really big one. Now, obviously, it has not been reflected in the share prices of the junior companies, which is how, when you say I'm busy, I'm busy creating mining companies. I find assets that I really like, or mines. I put together the management teams, the board of directors, the funding in place, the relationships with the bankers, et cetera, and then I let them go do their thing, hoping that, we'll create a lot of value along the way. And that's my business. And I honestly thought a couple of years back, and that's why I really expanded my office. I brought in there's 75 people in our office now. We have 35 or 40 geologists and engineers. So I thought, I'm going to go for it because it's fun. I enjoy this business. Even good days, bad days, I still love the challenge of creating wealth. And as you know, most of my life is philanthropy, and I have 4 different foundations that do different things, and I need to fund those things. So, I create the wealth, and the wealth, a lot of it goes to my foundations. which I know is something Doug doesn't agree with, but that's who I am, and that's what I
I've worked
do.
on him. I've worked on him a little bit with it, where I've got an idea there could be good causes in it. So I think I've
Yeah.
made a little dent,
Yeah,
maybe.
little. Anyways, but yeah, so that's why I ramped up because I felt that this cycle was going to be huge in metals, gold specifically, but other metals too, the critical minerals. And so I'm doing like, copper and silver and gold and, nickel and, you know, iron ore, you name it. I'm looking at everything and I got the team to do it. So yeah, that's my take on it. And I have fun doing it.
And I know you have a whole bunch of different companies, but is there something that you're really excited about right now? Is there a and I know I don't want you to, because you talk about one of them doesn't mean you're not excited about all of them.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it
is there something?
depends. Yeah. So you heard of the premium resources, the one in
Yes.
Botswana? I, I have not seen an opportunity like that in a very, very long time. And the fact that we managed to assert ourselves and take control of that company because previous management had completely screwed it up unnecessarily, loaded it up with debt at the wrong time. They weren't generating cash. I mean, they made almost every dumb decision known to mankind, and the stock collapsed. And it came on our radar, and one of our guys, Morgan Leckstrom, went in there and spent 6 months restructuring the whole deal. Debt, getting rid of debt, changing management and changing the board, and more importantly, applying a strategy that actually made sense to develop this incredible. It's copper, nickel, and platinum group metals, and it's also got cobalt in there, which they'd never really asked for economics. So it's a very important deposit in the safest country in Africa. It's Botswana, and I think this has the opportunity, if certain things happen, to become a multi-billion-dollar play, and it's only trading at a market value of about 100 million. So I'm really excited about that, but I'm also excited about Eros. We're building a huge gold company in Colombia, like literally huge, with 20 million ounces of measured and indicated ounces, another 10 million of inferred, so 30 million ounces in all of the deposits, high grade, underground operations, two with expansion programs and mine builds. So, and still trading relatively cheap compared to the rest of the gold players. So yeah, I'm excited about that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Tech stuff, we talked bad about tech, but I just want to get your view on AI in general. What do you think?
Yeah.
Because I have a view that's going to define our future in ways that are very difficult to imagine right now. What's your view?
I'll take it a step further. It's impossible to imagine. And when you think about it in this regard, and I wrote an article on AI about 6 years ago or so, kind of before ChatGPT, before any of this stuff. And I said that eventually AI, have you ever read the book, Ray Kurzweil's book about the future? He's the futurist.
Singularity is near.
Yeah, that's the book. Anyway, and he was making certain predictions quite a while back about how the world was going to change to a point where it'd be unrecognizable, and he called that moment in time the point of singularity, after which you cannot predict an outcome. It's a term used in physics, and now that AI has come on with the kind of speed that it's developing, I look at it this way: there is almost no job in the world that eventually cannot be replaced by AI and robotics. And you've seen the advance in robotics. I mean, equally moving at an equal speed.
Unbelievable.
So what happens? So what I like to compare it to is, if you remember the Industrial Revolution, it obviously changed the way that the world worked, but it created problems that eventually resulted in revolutions and wars, etc. All the communist movement, the Marxist movements, etc. And I said 6 years ago that AI, as it changes the world we live in, is going to make that look like a garden party. Okay? Because think about it this way: if I'm right, if AI and robotics can do any job that you can possibly, almost have any job, maybe not personal healthcare or whatever, but almost any job you can imagine, what's going to happen to 8 billion people? Who's going to take care of it? Universal basic income? Okay, that might work for a while, but then those that are in power that control the system are going to someday look and go, why do we need 8 billion people? You know,
I
to
think they're
feed.
already saying that.
Yeah, I know. Why should we be feeding 8 billion people? You know, they're useless. They're like drones, you know, as in the case of bees, you know, they're useless. They just create more bees. So I honestly think that it's now happening at such a speed that the outcome is going to be, it's going to change everything about humanity. And Doug, this might happen in our lifetimes, you and me,
Yes.
in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. And, you know, are we ready for that? No, because there is no consensus on how to regulate AI because there's a global competition between China and the US who's going to reach AI supremacy first, and they're not going to cooperate. And certainly in the US, it's all about making money, and China's all about strategic objectives. And they're not going to, they're going to, as in quantum computing, same thing. There's a race to quantum supremacy. Whoever gets there first is going to can realistically wreak a lot of havoc on the rest of the world. Um, uh, Quantum communications, you know, China's way ahead of the game in quantum communications. So all of these things, these technologies that are moving at a tremendous speed, and it's a race. What does that mean in a world where we're not getting along? You know, where there's a global competition between two superpowers. And I, you know, I don't think the outcome is pretty for humanity. And AI really scares the shit out of them.
Is there a utopian view though toward it that you could have? That's
Yeah,
dystopian.
yeah. Eventually, so okay, I'll give you the utopian view. The couple of million people that'll be left after it's all over are gonna have a wonderful life, and and that'll be the utopian. Then we're gonna have to go and explore other planets and get the hell out of this place. But all I'm saying is, how do you feed and control 8 billion people when they have no jobs? So is that
Well, I mean,
how do I make a utopian case for the world as it exists today?
yeah, again, but the productivity gains are just like the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah,
It just completely altered productivity in a massive way, making possible things that were impossible before, like skyscrapers
yeah.
and producing industries that no one could imagine before, like cinema, and my hope is my hope, and I know I can see that. Believe me, I've watched Terminator. I know how this goes.
Yeah, but that's
Uh,
not how it's going to end. I'll explain to you.
okay,
But go ahead,
well,
finish your sentence.
but the positive part of it is that productivity is the miracle of wealth. Like it is the way humanity can
I,
improve.
I agree with you, but the wealth will always accumulate to the very few, as it did in the Industrial Revolution. You know, Rockefellers, Carnegie, all of these guys, J.P. Morgan, Vanderbilt, all of these guys, they were the tech oligarchs that we have today.
Yeah.
So very few who could control the system, control the technology, are in a position of power, are going to benefit tremendously. And yes, productivity is going to go through the roof. But again, what are you going to do with 8 billion people? Okay, but going back to your Terminator, that's not the way it's going to end. Terminator is kind of a false narrative of how AI is going to harm humanity. And if you've ever read Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0, he
Yeah, I have
explains
actually.
it. Okay, so he explains it beautifully. He says, listen, AI does not have an intention. It has an objective. And if the objective is to complete a task, it'll find the most efficient way to complete that task, regardless of what's in its way. And he compared it to man building a dam. So if you're building a dam somewhere, you run across an anthill, you have no problem kicking that anthill and destroying all the ants. They're ants. Your objective is to build that dam. And that's the way he says it can harm humanity, because we still don't know how AI reaches certain conclusions. It surprised even the creators of the
Yes.
AI that it finds different ways to reach a conclusion or solve a problem. And and not harming mankind is probably not part of the objective. It's like, I'm just going to get from A to B. And I'm going to do it the best way possible, and without any thought to what it does, what the ramifications of that move is.
Mm. Well, that's why I'm motivated by like the open source, decentralized things like what DeepSeek put out. I mean, I think those things are a miracle for the average guy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But that's not going to be the end of it. I use ChatGPT sometimes. I actually amuse myself by asking it political questions, which it won't answer.
Just for fun.
Yeah, but it won't answer because let's talk about another subject.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have to convince it. I'm like, I know what you're saying, but how would Trump view it? And it says, "Oh, I get it," and then it'll spiel
Yeah,
Trump version of it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, but it's interesting. But yeah, so we're going through a profound change. As Yogi Berra said, predictions are difficult to make, especially about the future. And so who knows? We're living in interesting times. And
yeah,
but the only thing that scares me is global war. Because we're not going to come out of that looking very good if that happens. That's really, to me, that's the scariest thing of all right now. All of this bravado, all of this talk, taunting Iran, and Iran's just going to, if anybody attacks them, they're just going to move quicker to get a nuclear weapon. That's our only form of defense. The one thing you want to try and prevent, you'll force them into doing it.
yeah, yeah. And it's not just the U.S. It's you hear the things from the European leaders toward
Yeah.
Russia. Same thing. It's just
Yeah.
insane talk.
Yeah, the rhetoric is very brave and bold, and people don't think about what real war looks like. It's ugly. It's really ugly. And, no one's ever had it here in the West. We haven't had it on our home turf. We don't know what it's like to have your country destroyed and, have to start from scratch. That's why people aren't afraid of wars, because they always happen somewhere else. It's the Iraqis that are getting bombed to death there, Afghanistan,
Exactly.
wherever, Libya. I don't know. I just think that I'm not very optimistic, I think, but again, I have a very stoic view about things. There are things you can control and things you can't. And the
100%.
things you can't control, you just can't control them. So you live your life as best you can, drink a glass of wine, enjoy your friends and your family, cook. I love cooking.
Make some pizzas.
Make some pizzas and live your life. Live your life, because we cannot, as individuals, determine the course of history. It will unfold as it always has, because it's all subject to human nature. I don't care. The only thing that's changed over the centuries is technology. Human nature has never changed. Still about power and greed, and that's what drives humanity. And so I'm not optimistic, but I go, well, live a good life. Have good friends, have a good family.
And the AI thing, what effect will that have on mining, copper, on
Yeah.
your business? What effect does AI have on
I think that it's very positive. I think we're going to find more discoveries using AI and other technologies that are now being developed. And I was talking earlier about my premium resources in Botswana. We'll be talking about this soon, but let's just say we're going to be using AI and other technologies to move quicker than we normally, and be more effective in terms of developing that ore body and putting it into production. So yes, I think it's going to play a big role. And a lot of big companies are using some really interesting technologies now to either expand their deposits or find new ones.
I love it. Doug, I've been hogging the time here. You can go ahead and jump in with some questions. I only have one more for Frank.
No, listen, this is why I always enjoy getting together with Frank, which we just haven't been able to do for years. It's my fault. No, this has been, Frank, we agree on just about everything. Your foundations, you're right. I don't agree on that.
I don't think I'll ever convince you.
But everything else, absolutely everything else, we're absolutely on the same, not just page, but paragraph and sentence even. So what do you think about Africa? That's a continent that nobody thinks about, but I think it's going to become the epicenter of wars.
Oh, 100%. So I've gone to the Saudi Arabia conference in Riyadh 2 years in a row now, at the Future Metals Conference in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, their Vision 2030 involves getting their hands on critical minerals. That's a very big part of it. They want to bring a lot of the manufacturing and processing base back to Saudi Arabia. They want to build batteries in cars, solar panels. They want to do it all. and they're now on a campaign to secure those minerals from what they call the super region, which is Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia, and Africa being the one that they're focused on the most. So I've spoken on this topic on a stage in Riyadh to that audience, and what's happening is in Africa is becoming the biggest battleground in the world for these critical minerals, and it's playing out now in the geopolitics of what's happened. So if you think of all of the players in Africa, China was there first. They came over 20 years ago, and they did it very methodically, building infrastructure, acquiring the minerals licenses they need, but also building the railroads and the ports and the roads and everything necessary. So in a way that a lot of the African countries were very appreciative of. The latest player in there is the US, who's trying to figure out whether they're going to have a role in Africa or not. And I'm not sure they've decided that yet. There's all this conversation taking place about the DRC, where the DRC is inviting America to come in to protect them against M23, which is backed by the Rwandans, in exchange for critical minerals. I'm not sure that the US has bitten on that bait yet, but you got the Wagner Group, now Russia, through the Wagner Group, or whatever they're called now, in the Sahel, that is basically kicking out the West, France and America, and replacing it with, the licenses are going over to the Russians. So that's what Central African Republic, Mali, Niger, which has uranium, are all now moving away from France as the colonial power that they were, they lived under, and the Russians are kicking them out. So you've got in the Horn of Africa, you've got all sorts of trouble happening there, and you've got the UAE and Saudi Arabia on different sides of the war in Sudan. They're back in different sides. One's back in the rebel group, and the other one's back in the army. And you got Turkey's in there now. Qatar's in there right now. Like I said, the U.S. is now wanting to go in there and hopefully compete with China. And France is trying to regain their footing that they've lost. And it's all causing a lot of conflict or potential conflict. And so because a lot of these regimes are weak, and the weaker you are, the more easy it is to ask for Russian protection against jihadists, for instance, as is happening in Sahel. But there's also a lot of resentment against the old colonial powers, like France. Huge resentment in West Africa and the Sahel against France. And they're losing their footing there. So now they're moving to places like Kenya, where they never had a colonial presence. Yeah, in Africa is the fastest growing population on the planet. It's, I think they're going to add 1.3 billion people by 2050. So you got this massively growing population, incredibly wealthy in resources, but now the world is in there trying to position themselves, and in certain places causing conflicts, And so I think Africa has a lot to offer, but it's also in a very, it can be in a very dangerous position.
If I was a young African, I would make my way to Europe ASAP. And if I was a young Indian or Pakistani, I'd make my way to North America, which is what's happening, isn't it?
Well, yes, certainly the migration, yeah, because a lot of these, but think about it, the migration is coming from very, very weak regimes where there's no infrastructure, no extremely poor, no industry. It's coming from the northern part of Africa, and those are the ones that are migrating to Europe. And obviously, it's destabilized Europe to the point where it's become a huge political issue there. But Africa itself has huge opportunity, but also has a lot of risks because it's a geopolitical battleground now for the critical minerals.
Do you worry about a company, this company you've got in Botswana? Do you worry about it becoming a target of China and the U.S.'s, competing for it?
Well, they have a new president in there who I happened to meet last month in D.C., who's very America friendly, not terribly crazy about China. And I think that he's welcoming the West to come in there and develop. And it's a very stable country. The population is just a bit over 2 million people. It's a massive country with 2 million people, easy to manage. It's been very stable forever. It's the two most secure countries in Africa are Namibia and Botswana. And so I feel very safe there. Would I feel the same way in the DRC? Probably not.
I think not.
There's a lot of reasons why not.
Yeah.
Because this one of my worries is that it seems like a lot of these countries are going to have to choose sides at some point.
hmm
And it's just, if you get on the wrong side of that, your investment could completely wash away. So,
Yeah, and DRC is a perfect example of that because the Chinese have been in there forever, and now the current administration there wants to get more friendly with the U.S. They were too dominated by China, and they don't like having all their eggs in one basket. So they've been trying to court the U.S. to come in there. And again, under Trump, I'm not sure. Under Biden, I could see it happening because he was endorsing the Libido corridor between Angola, Zambia, and DRC. Trump may have a different view of Africa. I don't. It remains to be seen whether he considers Africa important enough to do anything about or completely ignore it.
well, some of these big, rich copper deposits are pretty compelling.
They are, but you know what? So far, I think there are a lot of people in the intelligence background or in the intelligence sector of the U.S. that are trying to figure out how to deal with African countries. But it remains to be seen what Trump will actually do. Trump sometimes, in his quest for making America great again, shoots himself in the foot. Just there, again, I understand his objective. His approach sometimes is questionable. And so again, with respect to Africa, I think it remains to be seen how the U.S. actually involves itself in Africa to the extent to which it involves itself. Because of just Trump's own biases, he calls a lot of these places shithole countries,
Yeah, kind of like
not,
Doug.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is that if you're in one of those quote shithole countries, how are you going to react to that? You're certainly not going to welcome it, that kind of talk. So I don't know. I think it's early, but it's going to be the battleground.
Okay, good. Doug, any last questions? I have one more for Frank I can wrap up with.
Don't want to forget to mention to Frank, since you sold out of our partnership in Argentina, you were wise because land prices have gone nowhere since then. So you've been able to redeploy that capital more intelligently.
I didn't get that much capital out of it.
No, but what you got was, well,
Better than nothing.
Better than nothing. It was better than zero.
Better, well, but frankly, this is a very welcoming place at this point, more than ever. So I think you just recognized.
Yeah, no, I was serious before we started taping this conversation. I was serious about what I said. And Matt, do send me that thing in Uruguay that you were talking about. I think I would like to, and I would recommend for a lot of people to have a place in either Uruguay or Argentina. Because if things go if they go badly, really the wrong way, there's very few places on earth you want to be. So yeah.
And the prices have not gone up a lot, and it's a great place.
No, and by the way, for those that have never been to our viewers that have never been to Argentina, oh my God, is it a beautiful country? It is stunningly beautiful. It is geographically diverse in all sorts, from jungle at the north to the prairies to the glaciers in the south. I mean, it's incredibly. It can be self-sustainable, and if the world falls apart, they have all the food that you need, all the energy you need. It's a European country, of the most European Latin American country. I
think you can make an argument. Buenos Aires is the most European city in the world at this point.
At this point, yes, that's a good point. So so I think you say I made the right decision, Doug. I may have made a mistake in selling my ownership in our land position there. I think I might have made, I told my wife, I think I made a mistake. I should have stayed in.
Well, I miss you, and you're welcome back at any time, Frank.
Okay. Well, guys, listen, this has been great. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun, Frank. I really appreciate your time. It's meant a lot to both Doug and I hope we have you back again sometime.
Absolutely. Nice talking to you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Frank.